The developers of the last spell are hard at work making corrupted runestones more of an eyesore, rebalancing the final night of Runenberg to be more palatable, and overhauling the gauntlet to make it a weapon that maybe someone wants to use. So while all of that is going on, I thought now is the perfect time to get back to basics, specifically the basics of building better bases. That's a lot of B's. Bases are very core, and base design is very core to the last spell. It is a Tetris-like endeavor, and understanding the factors that contribute to building better bases, I think, is something that can benefit nearly all players. So without further ado, let's talk about bases. For as long as I have been playing the last spell on stream, which at this point is a very long time, people have been asking me for essentially build guides. They want to know what turn they should build the inn, how many houses should they have, how many gold mines they should have, and I have always struggled to be able to answer that question. The reason is that there are a lot of factors involved, and playing the last spell well really involves reacting to those factors rather than just kind of like blindly order following a build guide. So I didn't want to encourage people by putting out a build guide that they might start to follow, and then the second that they got one less corpse mountain than me, they throw their hands up and they're like, this build guide is worthless. I can't do anything with it because I don't have as much gold as Alden did on night number 5 of Lakeburg. But in thinking about this, I do want to satisfy the core request. I want to help people build better bases and build bases in the right order and with the right structure, and help to share the rules that I use to govern the way that I build bases. So to that end, there are kind of 3 things that we're going to be doing here. We're going to talk about some best practices and common mistakes that people make when building bases. How do we make our bases better? We're then going to talk about the various approaches, production versus just a corpse-based economy versus some hybrid things. And also within those approaches, what are some rules of thumb that we can use to do a better job executing them. And then last, we're going to talk about the maps specifically, how the nature of the maps informs the way that we play them, but also some ideal map layouts. And the nice thing is, because none of the maps inside of the Haven are procedurally generated, we know which buildings we can keep versus which buildings we need to rebuild, etc., etc. So we will go through all of those things, but first we have to answer the question, why is this important? Why am I bothering to make a video about bases? This seems relatively straightforward. The first part of the answer is that, especially with the release of Runenberg, I realized that good base layout has a massive effect on your success. If you're able to hang on to that one extra building, not have to rebuild it, if you build things relatively in the right order, you have a lot to gain, and it can really be kind of a win-running thing. It can be the difference between struggling through a slog of a run and ending up really strong, rich with resources. The problem, and this is something that we've been discussing a little bit on the Discord, shout out to the Discord. We have some new players in the Discord. With Runenberg, people have been getting really excited, and they've been coming into the server, and sometimes they'll share screenshots of their bases, and this happens to be a screenshot that was shared by one of the members of my Discord. And what you will notice is that this base design is not what I usually build. Not to say that it is entirely wrong, but there's some fundamental challenges with it that are making this player's life a lot more difficult. The first is the base is kind of sprawling. The base is very biased towards the north. It's kind of not centered around the last spell, which means every time a wave comes from up there, their buildings are going to be getting wailed on like crazy. Awkwardly placed buildings has a tendency to create a lot of panic and potentially also thin the horde out. Runenberg has a great example of that horde thinning problem with the inn that's in the southeast corner of the map. Because what happens, in my experience, is you fight to try and keep the inn, and then when you fail, you've killed a bunch of mobs around the perimeter of the inn, but now that the inn is gone, the enemies all rush into the center where the inn was, and then that's a space where there previously were no enemies. And as a result, any enemies that you're killing there are not concentrated in a way that's going to maximize your corpse piles. So breaking walls and breaking buildings have a tendency sometimes to create a thinned out horde that can reduce corpse piles. If you're not familiar with how corpse piles works, I will link the video that I did explaining the mechanics of corpse piles. It's very important here, but it basically comes down to you want to be killing as many enemies on the same tiles as you can. But getting back to this screenshot that was shared on the Discord, there's a couple things that I want to draw your attention to. So the first is this green area. It is a large open area, which is awesome, right? That's a great place to kill the horde, great place to accumulate corpses. The issue is that there's a set of walls that were built in front of that space. So the horde is going to have to come up, generate a lot of panic breaking through the wall, and then they'll be able to come into that space and finally die, which is a bit suboptimal. Ideally, you want the enemy impacting your ballistas as soon as possible. Another note to point out here, and maybe I can even use a little pointer here. All of these ballistas that we have along here are unupgraded, which means that they're not going to have vision. So they can't see behind this building, they can't see behind these buildings, and they can't see on the outskirts of the base at all. Which means that until the horde breaks through, any enemies that are out here on the edge, right, in this space here, aren't going to be doing anything at all. Which brings me to the second kind of like major issue, which is the line of sight issue. We want to build bases that maximize the vision cone for our ballistas. These ballistas here will be able to get some vision in here, although the temple is blocking a lot of it. This whole area would be very difficult. And this whole space back here is going to be pretty much completely untargetable by those ballistas because they're not yet upgraded. So those two things in concert kind of start to demonstrate the problem that we have. Because we have, let's move back here. Because we have so much of our base up here, it's really difficult to defend. The horde is going to be constantly kind of streaming through these corridors, and our heroes are, if our hero's standing here, where this X is, or here where this X is, they're going to have a hard time seeing those corridors, seeing enemies in those corridors, and getting rid of them. So those were two things I wanted to point out. What we ideally want to do, and what I'm going to help through this guide, is to make our bases look more like this. We're going to have a critical set of buildings that we know we need. We're going to have amazing ballista coverage, right? Every one of these ballistas can view this entire space, and we can get amazing overlap from multiple ballistas. We have a large open area for our heroes to fight. If our hero is standing here, they have great vision this way, they have great vision this way, same for a hero that's standing here. So our heroes, because our base is relatively small, actually have the capacity to potentially cover multiple sides, stand on corners, give assistance across sides. And then if we were to add a few, say, warp gates to, the various cardinal directions, we could very quickly make it so that we have great control over the outer space while also having everything that we need inside. And we're not going to have a lot of tricky line of sight issues because we don't have any jagged walls or anything like that. So by the end of this guide, we'll have a formula for creating this type of base or a base like it in each of the maps that conforms to the Haven shape and also does what needs to be done so that you have access to the resources that you need moving forward. Pardon the interruption. This is future editing Alden once again, but this time I have something a little more meaty to talk about for a second. When I got done making this video, I had created a bunch of assets that I used for all the various base layouts. And I was like, these are really cool. It's a shame that I don't have a good way to share them. I could share the Google Slides that I created, but that would be a very awkward way for people to reference them. And so I was like, this would make a really good page on my website. So I went ahead and created a little JavaScript, CSS, and HTML thing that allows you to interactively explore the various builds that I am suggesting here. We can add more over time. We can add more information. There's a lot of things that we can do, but I wanted to give you a quick tour because I think it actually looks really cool. So first and foremost, you have your standard things. You can traverse back and forth between the builds. So for instance, this is the starting state of the map. This is the demolition that I recommend. Then here's the building layout for a corpse-based strategy. But what gets really cool is you can go ahead and click grid, and you can convert it into a 3D slightly rotated version of the build layout. And if that's not readable enough for you, you can uncheck 3D and you'll get a top-down view that allows you to figure out exactly the placements that we went. At some point I might add labels or something like that, but that allows you to kind of dig into it. You can select the map that you're interested in. Let's check out Lakeburg for a second here, right? And you can go in, you can also click along this bottom bar and say, what does it look like? What is the production build that I'm recommending looks like? This is what it is. Once again, we have the grid available to us. So if we want to see in a little more detail without all the kind of like 3D bits of the game obscuring it, you can go ahead and do that. So this is available to everyone. It's on my website, aldenpotamus.com /pages/tls-base-game. We linked in the video description if you want to go tinker with it, but I just decided to do something cool. It was a bit of like productive procrastination on my part, but I like the way that it turned out and I wanted to share it as part of this larger effort to do a bit of a basics of base building guide. So with that, I'll let previous Alden kind of go back and give you whatever they were talking about. So what's the formula for a well-built base? The short version is that it depends if you're going production or corp strats. The corp strat approach is going to be 4 houses, 2 to 3 gold mines, 2 mana wells, and an inn. That's kind of like a conservative estimate. If you're on Elderlicht, I would toss in a seer as well on both production or corp strats. And then on the production side of things, you're really replacing those gold mines with 2 jewelers, 2 armorers, and a weapon maker of your choice. The thing that I will note here is the source of gold for you as a player is selling gear on the production side, and it is selling gear and or salvaging mountains on the corpse side. And we'll talk more about the mechanics, how each of those work. But the only other thing that I would note is the 2 jewelers, 2 armorers, and weapon maker is up for debate. This is one of those factors. You may really like having a 3rd armorer. You may want to have 1 of each weapon maker. All of these things are reasonable permutations. I choose 2 armorers and 2 jewelers because I think that maximizes the amount of gear that I am getting that can be used on any of my heroes. And I think I already mentioned it once, but on Elderlicht, I run a seer. I think it's generally a good idea. Around night 6 through 8, you can run into a lot of pain if the mist has encroached significantly. So now let's talk build order. There is no hard and fast build order, but I broke this into 4 tiers of importance. The first and foremost tier is your houses and your house upgrades. They are your number 1 priority, and the way that I generally calibrate it is I always want to make sure that I have enough workers so that I never leave a mountain or an elite corpse pile to rot, basically, which means that if I have 2 mountains and an elite corpse pile, I will have at least 4 houses and 1 of them will be upgraded, giving me the 5 workers that I would need to take care of that. Then mana wells, they've been growing on me a lot. They're relatively cheap. They're something that you can kind of like pepper in here and there as you need them. And they give your heroes a lot of sustain, which allows you to play a little more aggressively on given nights. I think mana wells are good. And because they're so small and their footprint is so small, they're almost always worth building on any map. Then you have your gold production, whether that is gold mines or whether that is production buildings. In the case of mines, they are to fill the gaps, right? You go all the way up to 9 workers, and then you only get 3 corpse piles in an elite, so you only need 7 of those workers. The mines give you something to spend those last 2 workers on to get an extra 80 gold. On the production side of the house, selling gear is your gold production. So building those production buildings and then sinking your extra workers or however many workers you want to into those production buildings to produce more gear is really the methodology by which you get your gold production going. And that's also going to include upgrading your production buildings, which is a large gold sink, but we'll talk a bit more about that in the later parts of the video. And then last but not least, you have the inn. I say this all the time, but as a reminder, you want to build the inn at the absolute last moment right before disaster. So basically, you want to go as long as you can with as few heroes as possible. because the pool of XP that your heroes are receiving comes primarily from the shared XP pool, right? Some of it comes from the kills that they're getting, but then most of it is that shared XP pool. And if you add another hero, you're essentially creating a negative modifier on everyone's experience. And the reason this is important is because the in heroes are the approximate level of the heroes that you have. So the more you can push with a small roster of heroes, the higher level they will get. And then when you hire a high level hero that is comparable to them, you will immediately get a huge influx of XP. That's essentially all the XP that you saved up. So that's kind of a long-winded explanation, but build the in late. When you build it, start recruiting your heroes, and hopefully you're already at level 8 or 9. And as a result, you're getting heroes that aren't going to need to do a ton of leveling after you get them. So how does the economy work? In both of these approaches, they are going to hinge on corpse mountains. That is your, I call it here like seed funding, but it is essentially the baseline source of money that is going to get you running. You take those mountains, you convert them into gold, and then you use that to build more houses and to shop in the straight corpse strategy. And in the production strategy, you're building houses, you're building production buildings, and you're building production upgrades. You're then spending your workers on one of two things. In the corpse strategy category, you're just continuing to get items from corpse piles. And then if you have any left over, you're sinking them into gold mines. Whereas on the production side of things, you are putting your workers into productions or corpse piles. And that little greater than / priority arrow thing where I say that production is greater than piles has a caveat to it. And we're still discussing this in the Discord, but the short version is that production will get you higher level gear if you can upgrade it quickly. So you have to play in a risky fashion, and you have to sink a lot of money into upgrading your production buildings so they produce gear that is higher level than corpse piles. Corpse piles level up kind of naturally and get to the 4-5 range towards the end of a run. The asterisk, though, from my perspective, comes from the fact that it's really a balance of quality versus quantity. You will always get more quantity of gear from your workers using corpse piles because you essentially get a bonus 0.5 item for every worker that you spent compared to the next best option, which is one worker for one item. The problem there is even if that item is higher level, I am firmly a believer that the path to success is seeing as many items as possible. I don't want to see 10 level 5 items. I want to see 15 level 4 items because one of those 5 that I wouldn't have seen otherwise could be the exact item that I was looking for. It could be the item that has multi-hit on it. It could be the item that has an extra AP on it. So I'm very much of the way that you diminish the RNG of items in the last spell is to see more of them. And the absolute best way to see the most items, in my opinion, is corpse mountains, take all the bad gear, turn it into gold, re-roll the shop. The shop is the single largest selection that you can get of items to take a look at, and just roll the shop over and over again. Production strategy cares less about the shop and is more trying to produce so many items that you see lots and lots of items via that means. And then towards the end of the run, you do have an exceptional amount of gold and you can roll the shop to your heart's content. Both very effective. I've said it before, I think production tends to be a little more of a win more strategy, where if you mess it up and you buy the upgrade when you really should have bought some gear and some of your heroes die, your run can be in real trouble. Whereas I think corpse strats is a little more straightforward and there's less risk because you're really just zero overhead. You spend your workers to get gear or gold from your corpse mountains and you rinse and repeat, and you can basically spend all of your resources on getting your base, which is relatively minimal, up to snuff, and then gearing up your heroes. But I digress. Now we need to talk about some best practices for this. So the first of them is some of the buildings are in a good enough place. So you'll see this when we go to our ideal layouts, but sometimes I will label a building as either green or orange, which indicates that we might be able to use it and we might be able to structure our base in a way to utilize it. So if you can utilize a building that the map gives you for free, it's probably a good idea not to destroy it and rebuild it and to leave it where it is. Some buildings are just going to be in weird locations. I'm looking at you, Runenberg houses that are on the perimeter. They last a surprisingly long time. We'll talk more about it later, but it's okay to ignore them and let them generate resources like a gold mine, for instance, or give you workers until the point where they get destroyed and then you rebuild them. It's probably not worth tearing them down and rebuilding them prematurely though. Shorter maps are not going to be able to fully realize some of these builds. So pare back your expectations, go for 2 gold mines rather than 3 or whatever it happens to be to try to build whatever you can. Production is always going to be better on longer maps like Elderlicht and Lakeburg, and it can work on some of the shorter maps, but it's going to be more of a challenge because production is one of those things that once you get it going, it's juggernaut essentially. When you're building defenses, if you're going for a ballista strategy, then you always want to be investing everything in ballistas until one of 2 things happen. You hit 32 ballistas and you're just good, or you hit the final night and you want to build some walls to protect the ballistas that you have. As for ruins, anything under 4 ruins, don't even bother, just destroy them. I think they just get in the way. That's what I always do. And 4 ruins you can keep around in case you get like a round with a bad set of mountains, and then you can salvage a 4 ruin as a way to get a little cash influx and be able to utilize your workers who might have otherwise gone to waste. Generally speaking, ballistas should be concentrated around your last spell. Ballistas have a very interesting property, which is when they are co-located, a large number of them, they are much, much, much stronger than a few stragglers here, there, and everywhere. So concentrating your ballistas around the last spell, extremely powerful. And then last but not least, as a general rule of thumb, straight walls always beat jagged walls with some notable exceptions. I occasionally do non-straight walls in my ideal builds. You'll see them a couple of times here. But generally speaking, straight walls are good because they don't cause weird line of sight issues. You're not going to have like enemies just on the other side of it and you're going to be on the wrong side. Like you don't want to have like a base that has like a jut out in it because that causes issues. So those are the high level best practices that I will be trying to demonstrate in the builds. Then we have some advanced strategies to talk about. When I was talking about this in the Discord, some of the very production-minded members of my community were like, oh, just put the inn and the shop outside of your base. There are advantages and disadvantages to this. The main one is that the upgrades on inn and shop do die with the building. So if you upgrade your inn twice so that you can get 6 heroes, and then you destroy your inn, when you rebuild an inn, you will not be able to recruit the hero that you lost in the previous night without doing like 300 gold worth of upgrades. Same goes for the shop and shopkeeper's friend. So you will see all of these ideal builds are going to include the inn and shop being in the center of the base, the heart of the base protected. Advanced players who feel like they can take those risks in order to reach those high highs, more power to you, but I'm not going to recommend that as part of like any type of guide. Another just handy thing that you can do is empty spaces in your base can be filled with barricades, especially on like the final night. And what this does is this prevents, say, gargoyles from flying over your walls, because a gargoyle can only fly over your wall if they have a place where they can land. Runenberg being a exception because there are some void tiles inside the base where you can't barricade them off. But it can be a very helpful strategy to keep the enemies outside of your walls and make sure that even those gargoyles are chewing on your walls rather than doing something else. I said straight walls were good. I think generally speaking, cutting corners can be an okay thing to do when you're building bases. You can have your wall kind of do a little bit of a diagonal if there's a corner that was going to be sharp. It can be useful simply because it it's not going to cause many line of sight issues. And it might actually alleviate the ability for a hero to kind of come to the end of a wall and look around it and help out with the next side. And then ballista range should closely mirror the haven size. And I have a slide where I'll show you what I mean by this. But basically, you want your ballistas mostly killing things within the haven. So the first structural thing to talk about here is two size gaps are bad. The more I spent time building these idealized builds, the more I realized that one of the major downfalls is anytime you see a two gap between two. So for instance, here I have two examples of two ways to build houses next to each other. One of them is good, the one where you have two houses with a one gap between them, and the other is bad. And the reason for this is that every tile of a building has a one tile buffer zone around it that's going to block other things being built directly next to it. And so a lot of the space that your buildings take up is dead space. It's like a ring around those buildings, but those buffer zones can overlap. And you want to build your base constructions with as much overlap as possible to avoid the inefficiency of overlapping them. So that's just an important note. If you're kind of freestyling your bases, don't leave two gaps and try and avoid them as much as possible. The next thing we want to talk about is ballista placement. We have two ballistas that I'm placing on the same map here. And what I wanted to point out was that one of these is better than the other, and that's because of this idea of making your ballistas map to approximately the size of your haven. So on the left-hand side here, we have a ballista where only two of its tiles of targeting are outside of the base, whereas the other ballista that we could potentially place has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 slots, which means that that ballista, especially with engineering, is going to be hitting a lot of enemies outside the base and creating a lot less corpse piles as a result of it. So rather than in our idealized builds, me telling you exactly where to place every ballista, I'm just going to give you this piece of guidance to look around a little bit, hunt around for where the best place to place a ballista is to make sure that one, you have relative symmetry. You want every side of your base to have about the same number of ballistas servicing it. But then two, you also want to make sure that you're not creating a lot of spill of your ballistas because it just leads to less efficiency. So with that, we are on to the map build guide portion of this. So I'm going to give you some idealized builds. And the first we're going to start at the beginning, which is Gildenberg. I'm not going to bother with Swampfurt. Don't at me. But Gildenberg here is a very short map. And as a result, you're not going to get kind of a full build, but I wanted to still show you what a full build might look like so that you can borrow some pieces from it. The only other thing that I think is useful to remember is because there's some crevasses on the kind of north and western portion of the map, you can get into these situations where flying enemies are kind of spilling around, and that can be a little annoying. Also, because of the way that the map funnels, you're going to end up with a lot of concentration of enemies on kind of the back flanks of your base, potentially. But let's talk through kind of the structure of it. So for each of the maps, I'm going to do a series of diagrams like this. So I'm going to show you the base as it kind of exists. This is the now demolished version. I'm going to tell you which buildings I think are salvageable versus not. So in this case, that front house, let me see if I can do this. Yeah, so this front house here corresponds to this house here. Bad aim on that arrow, don't mind me. And I marked it red because I do not think that it is salvageable. Whereas this shop and this house, which correspond to here and here, are in positions that I think are good enough that they can be worked with. So this is the blank slate of Gildenberg, and then this is your first glimpse into one of the builds. So here we have the corpse strat. I'll always do the corpse strat first and the production strat second. So the way that I have aligned this is we're trying to keep everything relatively close to the last spell while also conserving the shop and that back house. So we put the inn up here, kind of on the outskirts a little bit, but we're trying to anytime we're doing anything, we're always trying to kind of minimize the footprint, and you can think of the footprint as being 4 lines that make up a box, something like this, right? And if I put something here, then this line would extend further out, which would make our base less efficient because it would be increasing the footprint. So we're trying to make the smallest footprint that fits everything in. Now you might notice over here, there's some too wide gaps, gasp, right? And if I wanted to, I could have moved this house up one like this. So this house could have actually been on these 4 tiles here. The reason that I sometimes don't do that is because I am likely going to be building a wall along here. This move here would not change the overall line of the wall that's there. So sometimes it's nice to have your houses butting up against your walls just to avoid flying enemies or something like that. Also, though, if you're running humans and you're doing a lot of jumping in and out of your base, maybe having that house back a little bit is better. So once we've got that, then we build walls. And this shows you the lines that I was talking about before. I didn't fully keep this line along the back and kind of create like a large, like this space here and the space here would have been very excessive, so I didn't bother doing that. And instead, I just did this little squiggle here. And the reason is because like I was saying before, you're potentially gonna have like flying enemies coming in from this side and this side. And so I didn't wanna create like a big open area to kind of like invite them in, right? The horde's already gonna be coming in this way, but our ballistas are gonna have great coverage, right? You know, our ballistas are gonna be easily doing kind of like this space here, maybe even a little more. And so as a result, you're going to have a pretty good kill zone here and a pretty good kill zone here, and maybe like a few enemies will sneak through this barricade or something like that, but I don't think it's a big deal. And this structure gives us a nice consolidated area, so absolutely everything, even this house here, is covered. Then we move on to the production equivalent. And for the production equivalent, I did do something a little different than I have done before. First of all, I would be super impressed if anyone managed to do all 5 production buildings on Gildenberg, given how short the map is. But I decided to go for kind of like a long structure here, right? So, you know, we can bring up the walls, but you know, basically what I'm doing is I'm going for the same structure, but I go for like a full rectangle and I just let things pour back. Now, the reason for this is, generally speaking, the best way to get corpse piles is by maximizing this buffer zone outside of the map, right? And because of where the shop was, we can't get a lot of space over here, right? We're just going to have a 2-tile gap over there. But having a nice large gap over here means that if you start to get in trouble with the wave coming this way, you're going to have a huge amount of space to maneuver. Little less over here, and you can just bias your ballistas back a little bit rather than super front loading them up here, so that you don't have too much of their range extending out here, and you can have a lot covering here and definitely have good coverage back here so that you don't have any problems. So that's the way that I would do production if I was approaching it for Gildenberg. But generally speaking, when you're looking at these, this right here is going to be kind of like the platonic ideal, at least in my eyes. You're best off going with, I think, the corpse strat. I think the production strat is aggressive and can lead to higher highs, but requires a great deal of value. So let's move on again. Now on to Lakeburg, the second map. So much room and time for activities. 12-night map feels great. You have a lot of time to do all the things you want to do. The starting location of the buildings is horrifyingly awful. The northern, I call this like the Northern Haven Expanse, but it's a terrible location for anything. And then you also have 2 partial sides. And what I mean by that is that really, for the most part, you can think of the enemies only spawning over here and only spawning over here. They will occasionally, when the mist is close, like wander in, like, you know, through these bridges and those types of things. But the bulk of the forces are going to be here and here, which makes them a little easier to handle. So this is the first time we're seeing orange. This inn is bad, and this house is bad. This house we will use for production only. Like there's a way to make this work in a production structure that is reasonable enough that I decided to keep it. But ultimately you're going to want to move both this in and move this somewhere over here, and we'll go over those. So first is the corpse strat, and the corpse strat reuses none of the buildings. So you're going to be building them all from scratch, but you've got your 2 gold mines, your 2 mana wells, your 4 houses, your other gold mine, your inn, and this. This is, from my perspective, a fantastic structure. I am a huge fan of the way that Lakeburg kind of arrays itself, right? Every single side, you got 4 tiles here, you got 4 tiles here. You actually have 5 tiles here, and then you have another 5 tiles here. So you have a ton of room to work. And with Ballista, you can keep almost all of the Ballista shots within the confines of your haven. And you really probably just need to have someone up here or someone up here to take care of the stragglers that come in this way. But to me, this is like, you're eating good in Lakeburg. There are few maps where you get kind of a more ideal thing. I did shave the corner here, right? We talked about that before. I can note it over here. We could have made it square, but what I find is especially when things like gargoyles and stuff like that come in, they end up like floating on top of this water here, and then they end up coming in this way, and it can sometimes be a little annoying. Right, the stragglers that come in this way. So adding a little bit more vision from over here and over here to help out, I think is worth the asymmetry and moving away from the squareness. Now for production. In production, you can see we managed to save this house. This house is a happy house, and it gets to hang around. But you can see that things start to get a little expansive, right? And now, as I was mentioning before, you know, a more experienced player could be like, okay, well, the inn, I'm just going to move it outside. And then that means that I can move this over here. And then, you know, I can move this house out of the way, and I can put, you know, I can move this trinket crafter here or something like that, right? It's a lot more risk, like I was saying, but you can get almost as small bases with production as you can get with corpse strats. But this was my best effort. And, you know, obviously you can see like this particular mana well is violating the cardinal sin, right? So if you wanted to go 1 mana well, you could move the wall in 1 so that it's a bit closer. But you'd only be gaining kind of a marginal improvement. And from my perspective, I just popped it out. This is a naughty thing for me to do because it can lead to some really annoying, awkward situations where you have like some guy hanging out right here and your hero. Generally speaking, the reason that I don't mind it is that I generally post my hero up here. So the horde is kind of coming by and maybe leaking around a little, but my hero is here. They're not really getting pincered, and they can take a step back, cover this, and also be taking care of this. So it's not a huge deal. And from my perspective, because this wave is mostly all over here, this space here being a little larger has a big impact on the overall performance. So I wanted to preserve this square here as much as possible. And there was probably an argument for me to make this wall go out and over like that instead. So continue this wall out like that. But again, it felt like just doing that little jut out wasn't a big deal. So now we move on to Glenwald. So Glenwald is the diamond shaped one, right? You got this, and then it kind of does this, goes flat, and then like that. Never have I seen more of a diamond. And Glenwald is on the shorter end of things, but it's long enough that you can do production pretty effectively. Has a very awkward north side. The distance from here to here, from entering your haven to getting to your last spell, is very short. And because of the way the forest kind of like funnels enemies in, you end up with like a weird fight in this space almost every single time. The building placement is mostly abysmal, although like some salvage maybe here and some salvage maybe here, but it's a little bit hard to make it work. And the southwest indent also makes it so that things are coming in sometimes pretty quick. So here's my evaluation of it. I think that you can almost always, in fact, always use the, That was a weird line right there. But you can almost always use the shop. In fact, this shop location has been kind of growing on me, and you'll see it in some of the later builds. And then this house, if we're doing production, is not in the worst spot, and we can kind of make it work. So let's first look at corpse strats. And corpse strats for this map actually look really good, and I'm a big fan of it. You get a really clean build where you just have your bank of gold mines here, you have your houses here and here, 2 mana wells here that encroach a little bit on this side, but not too badly, and then the inn there. I really like this structure. I don't think I usually build my Glenwald base this way, but I actually think it does a relatively good job of mirroring the structure of the Haven, and this mana well is perhaps the only part that's really like jutting out a little more than I necessarily would want it to. So you put a wall on that and you chip it away a little bit. If you were going to go 1 mana well, potentially you could cut that part off and have this be your wall instead to give you a little extra space to fight right here. But I don't think it's super necessary, and I think that this map, this base design actually works like super duper well. Then we move on to production, and I think the production one turned out pretty well. Like I said, we keep this house that was previously there that felt like way far out there, right? And once again, you know, we've got a base that honestly, the production base is maybe doing a little better job of preserving some space up here for fighting, which is nice, but we're getting a little close over here and maybe a little close over here. And this is a big expanse that you're really going to need to have a hero like on this corner, because these ballistas aren't going to reach all the way to the back ranks over here. But when you put a wall on it, you actually end up with some pretty decent clearances. Like I said, this is very tight, but that's really just the indent doing indent things. This 2-tile indent is a big problem, and it just means that generally speaking, I'm still killing things in this space just because it's very hard when you only have 2 tiles of clearance. And 3 over here is a little rough, but like I said, I get jammed up over here. Well, not over there, but like over here more often than anywhere. And this is pretty good at mitigating that. On to the new map, Runenberg. I really like Runenberg. You know, I think people have been maligning it a little bit. I'd like to see the rewards amped up just a touch, and also the XP curve amped up just a little bit. But other than that, I think it's in a relatively good space. It is very short. It has a great shop placement, but due to its shortness, I think you're insane going production on this map. But I'm sure some people will do it. This gold mine and this inn are horrifically bad. I don't even know where to begin. They are in such terrible locations. And then these houses are so exposed, and yet they seem to survive way longer than I ever thought they would. It's so bizarre to me. And then the other thing that you have going on here is you have this line of holes in the ground, and then also these holes here that just make you a little more susceptible to flying enemies than you otherwise would have been. But let's look at the map. Pretty much, like I said, nothing's happening here. Nothing's happening here. You're not going to use this long-term or this long-term in your base build, but you can leave them for a long time. Like, I have had a horde of enemies just march directly past this house and this house without killing them. And I'm just like, I'm killing in this space here and I'm killing in this space here, and the houses just survive. It's bizarre. I think destroying the inn is probably the way to go. I keep keeping it, but like, especially on a map as short as Runenberg, you shouldn't be picking up a hero early on anyways. You need to concentrate that XP. And then this gold mine, it's just passive gold until it gets broken. I find I don't get attacked from the side all that often at all. So I think it's good eaten, and I don't mind the shop location. I think it's fine. The fact that it's 1 tile from the last spell is all I could ask for, really. So the corpse approach, I'm giving you 2 alternate builds here. The first is keeping the inn, and this is the 3 gold mine approach. So you get 3 gold mines, 2 there, 1 there, and then I like wrapping the houses around like this. It fits really well, and this crevice plays super well. This crevice here plays super well with putting an inn on this corner. Illustrious from the Discord came up with like the base version of what I'm describing right here, and I think putting the inn here was a real stroke of genius. I generally do not run 3 gold mines though. I don't like that my wall here has been pushed out by the two mana wells. So what I usually do is I do the 2 gold mine version, which is this one here, where you have a gold mine flanking both sides here, and then you have 2 mana wells kind of tucked in here. You still have your 4 houses. The other thing about Runenberg in particular is, and this may go more broadly, but because gold mines have the same structure as scavenger camps, it might be worth swapping in scavenger camps to get a little more passive materials if you're selling your gear earlier. Like if you're converting corpse mountains to items, then it might be a great idea to go scavenger camps instead of gold mines, so you continue to get something to fund your ballista addiction. I found generally with Runenberg having less ballistas is not the end of the world, but this base here, the 2 version, I think is perfect. Like this is a tight, mean, lean fighting machine. Perfect square, don't mind it. The only place where the crevices are interrupting the wall is on this corner, which I can deal with, especially since the inn being in this corner means that flying enemies have to fly a long way to get around it, so you're not in too much jeopardy there. I really like this structure. You have huge clearance over here, things are a little tight here, but mostly great, and then over here. You have amazing clearances, and it helps out so much with getting done when you need to. This is my best cut at the production approach, and it's still reasonable without being quite as great as as the corpse version. You're still getting decent clearances. You have your buildings that you need. You have your 2 armors. Obviously, this can be any weapon building. We didn't really talk about this. And the armorers can be replaced with the seer. That's something that I should have mentioned for all the maps, but if you ever need a seer, it has the same footprint as one of the 2 armors, and you could swap it in to kind of protect yourself. But when we look at this one, with the wall up, it looks really good. I cut this out so that this crevice doesn't end up breaking my wall in a way where like a flying enemy could get in there and be really annoying. But the big thing, if we look over at like the grid view over here, is that I wanted to keep this build so these 2 were on the outside. So that 1, I wasn't going to get into a situation where like a flying enemy flew to that tile, and 2, I wasn't having a wall that was kind of like broken. So you can see I was like very conservative with what I put over on this edge to make sure that that happened. But I'm pretty pleased with the way that this came out. Even though we only have 3 clearance over here, this is probably the most dangerous one. I would put my strongest hero on this side, because you're going to be doing a lot of work over here. This also happens to be the random side down here, so there's a lot of line of sight issues that you're potentially running into. But overall, that's production for Runenberg. I don't think we're going to see a lot of people doing this, but more power to you if you decide to. Elderlicht. Okay, so this is the only map where I strongly recommend a seer. I think you are you're a brave person if you're not running a seer. So, go figure. But I think having a seer, especially for those mid-game nights, like night 6 through 10, can get really dicey, and being able to push back a couple times when the cost is only 2 workers makes a big difference. So, most of the buildings are relatively well placed. You can definitely keep this seer in your build. The watchtowers. Oh, thank you so much for the watchtowers. If I could destroy them before I played, I absolutely would. The scavenger camp is as hopeless can be, and there is a serious lack of ruins. Every single one of these ruins should just get destroyed. Never spend workers on 2 or 1 ruins. It's not worth it. So what can we save? We can save the shop every single time. We can save the seer every single time. That's what the green means over here. And this house is labeled orange because Elderlicht is a very long map. And as a result, you have a lot of time to get things just so. And you can see an absolutely evil 2 gap that they have created here that If you are trying to make an optimal base, this is suboptimal. And if something is going to move, I think the house is the thing that should move. So for some of the builds, I tried to keep this house in place, but for most of them, I ended up destroying this house also so that I could get everything absolutely as packed in there as humanly possible. So I'm going to give you a few permutations for this one as well. The first is the 3 gold mines, no seer. You have to be really brave to go with this one, but we kept it nice and tight with a gold mine here, a gold mine here, a gold mine here. You got the 4 houses kind of lined up over here, your 2 mana wells, and your inn, which I think is like, this is absolute like minimum fighting weight, but the fact that it forgoes the seer is a little rough. One thing that I will say is if you have a lot of money, you can build the seer, push back the fog, destroy the seer, or build the seer on a side where there's no attack and hope that you get 2 rounds of it. So the seer is a building that you could potentially, in a build like this, just, toss the seer over here, use it twice, and then hit the reset button. The 3 gold mines seer build is a little bigger without getting too crazy, but you can see basically this gold mine ended up overflowing up here in order to make that work, which pushed us out like an extra tile this way. And then other than that, things look relatively the same. And then the one that I would recommend, and I will always give my recommended version as the final one of these. So I think 2 gold mines seer is the sweet spot. You have a nice tight square. So, you're not having that extra gold mine kind of pushing things over this way. You get to conserve 3 buildings in this structure. So this house survives, this shop survives, and the seer survives. And with Elderlicht, I think that's only good for business. So I like this one. It looks great when you box it in. I think that's excellent. Looks really good. I did just leave this here. You could hypothetically tuck this wall in one more if you're feeling a little brave, but I do think that this corner can become really annoying, and it's nice just to have the flat surface. So that's why I built it the way that I built it. Then for the production one honestly looks like it fits in approximately the same space. I think Elderlicht is very production friendly in terms of the structure. I did have to move this house down 1 because there was a 2 gap here, which I converted into a 3 gap so that I could tuck this Manuel in here. But I think for maps like Elderlicht, it is worth doing these moves and these micro adjustments in order to make sure that your base is absolutely as tight as possible. And then I went for a little bit of corner cutting on all 4 sides on the production version of this one. I definitely wouldn't recommend creating an indent here or an outdent there, but I think these corner cuts are good. And given that Elderlicht in particular is a map where you're getting it often in like what I call like the X pattern, where you're getting it from all 4 corners, it's nice to give yourself a little extra space on these corners to fight, because your ballista are going to be significantly less powerful. And that brings us on to Glintfein, the final map that is deceptively long because the rewards are essentially doubled. So you're getting a lot more value with each night. So even though it's only 8 nights, it really plays more like a 12-night type of run, give or take. It is a beautiful blank slate. You can do anything you want to do with it. And there is a building phase that precedes the combat phase. So this was the only map where I didn't have to fight the first night in order to be able to build all of the structures that I needed to for my screenshots. So thank you, Glintfein, for that. And the map is semi-procedural, but not within the Haven. So for our purposes, it doesn't change too much. So first and foremost, it is just a circle. There's really not much to it. There's really no features to talk about. It is perfectly symmetrical. The last spell is in exactly the middle. There's no weird cutouts. There's just a little bit of rounding on the edges. So the way that we take advantage of this is to just do a very standard build. Like I said, I really like the shop down here and then doing kind of like perfect rows in every direction. I think it's a really nice way to make it work. And I love how compact this particular design is, even for having 3 gold mines in it. So you box it in nice and proper. You end up with 5 tiles over here, 4 tiles over here, 4 over here, and 4 over here. Not everything can be perfectly symmetrical, go figure, but still, it's nice. Doesn't really matter which side gets the 5. You could probably shift it around if you really wanted a different side to, but looks great to me. No complaints on Glintfein so far. The production one, things get a little cozier. It is hard to get everything that you need absolutely. So, you know, you have your buildings. Everything is relatively normal, and I mean, probably we can just go on. At this point, you've got the gist. I do a little bit of corner cutting here and here just because we are getting a little close on some of the corners. There's not a lot that we can do while getting all of the production buildings that we need to squozen in here. Glintfein's Haven does at times feel a little small just because of this rounding. It's hard to make the corners work, but if you extend too much out this way, you end up with kind of like a weird shaped base, and it can be a little difficult. So I think this is about the best that you can do. I certainly prefer the corpse strat version of this over the production version of this, but I can see both ways. And because the number of nights is shorter, the benefit from production is less. You can get production up and running because you have a lot of money, but you don't have a lot of nights to necessarily get it fully cooking. So I think that does it. So let's talk some quick conclusions. So first of all, one of these builds was missing a house, and I photoshopped it in post. Can anyone figure out which one it is? There's a little scavenger hunt, and if someone finds it and lets me know in the Discord, maybe I'll do something fun. Speaking of the Discord, you should join the Discord. It's a great place for new players and experienced players to share the things that they've discovered, ask important questions, do some science with all of us. It's a great thing to do. Twitch and YouTube has been blowing up. So come watch us live. We're doing tons of science. We're going to be doing lots more runs again this week. We'll probably be doing a near full week of the last spell again this coming week, and would love to have you. And subscribe for more videos like this one. We got a bunch of new ones coming up. As soon as the new gauntlet lands, I'll be doing a weapons tier list. We'll be doing a map guide for Runenberg once we know what the boss fight actually looks like. And I'm in the process of making the most requested video on the channel, the 2.0 version of our build guide. So if any of those things seem exciting to you, leave a like and toss a sub so that you'll know the moment they come out. But for now, that's it for me. I hope that this basic building guide, whatever the heck it was useful to you and you found some value in it. Let me know what the biggest aha moment was for you. But for now, I'm out. Have a wonderful one, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.